Welcome, everyone, to our episode of Secret Jews, Uncovering Hidden Jewish Traditions. Today's episode is about asking the right questions. First, let's go ahead and give our sponsors their due. The Secret Jews of Calabria, Uncovering Jewish Traditions Hidden for Over 500 Years, a wonderful documentary. For more information about how to purchase your own copy or to how to have your group or organization actually host a viewing, visit RabbiBarbara.com and you can get that information. IbexMotion and Carl Perkal, documentary film as a key to our past and future. You can find out more about Carl by emailing him at cperkal, P-E-R-K-A-L, at netvision.net.il. And Rabbi Barbara Aiello, Italy's first woman rabbi. For more information about Rabbi and all the wonderful services that she offers, go ahead and visit RabbiBarbara.com. And the William David Company, rethinking small business marketing since 2009. To find out your virtual engagement rating, visit WilliamDavidCompany.com. Well, first let me go ahead and introduce our co-host for today. First of all, we'd like to have you meet Rabbi Barbara Aiello. Good morning, Rabbi. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Good morning. It is my pleasure to be with you and to talk about the Secret Jews of Calabria today.
And let's go ahead and meet our film producer, Carl Perkal.
Hi, Randy. I am really pleased to be here. I'm really pleased to be here with Rabbi Barbara. I'm thinking, Randy, you're in New York or New Jersey. I'm in Israel. Rabbi, where are you now? Are you in Italy or are you in Florida?
I'm in Florida, but I will be in Italy in about 10 days.
Incredible. Fabulous, fabulous. So it's good to be here.
Well, Carl, would you like to kind of start our conversation today?
I'm going to jump right in. You know, is it already 4 or 5 years ago, I was reading the newspaper here in Israel, and I read an article about Rabbi Barbara, and I just thought to myself, how can it be, and this is really a question to you, Rabbi, how can it be that so many people in Italy or maybe in Portugal or in Spain or other places, people who are not Jewish, people who may know nothing about having historic roots to Judaism, but how can it be that today they are fascinated when they find out that they actually might be from secret Jewish background? And I thought that was amazing because I think, you know, if you go back 50 years, if you said to somebody, maybe you're Jewish, they would say, oh, God forbid. So what is it that has kind of made Jews or being Jewish something almost kind of in? Rabbi, maybe you can take us to that.
Oh, I'd be happy to. Let me just give you a little background of my own growing up as a Italian Jew in Pittsburgh, where I was born, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Many times people would hear my surname, Aiello, and then they would find out that my dad and I frequented a synagogue, and they would say, but you're Italian, you can't be Jewish. And when I later went back to my ancestral home, where my dad was born and all of my ancestors have lived for over 400 years, I discovered that there were, all throughout my family, there were people who had secret practices and hidden practices. Some of them understood that they might be Jewish, but many others said, no, these are just our family traditions. I began to immerse myself in the concept of B'nai Enosim. B'nai Enosim is a Hebrew phrase that means children of the forced ones. And my background and the background of many Sicilians, Southern Italians, those who grew up in the Aeolian Islands, and then going back to Spain and Portugal, goes back to the time of the Inquisition, when Jews were forced, B'nai Enosim, children of those who were forced, into Christian conversion and adult baptism. And as a result, if they wanted to maintain their Jewish traditions, they had to practice in secret. And they had to pass these traditions along by word of mouth from father to son, from mother to daughter, grandparents to grandchildren.
So, Rabbi, in your family, I know this is in the film, we went, and it took us a few years, but we made the film, The Secret Jews of Calabria. And there's a point in there where you're talking about your grandmother here you were in America, and yet she went, well, maybe we should see the clip, because I found it amazing that you could get this sense of how people kept those traditions, but they were kind of scared about anybody knowing. So, Randi, maybe we can take a look at that.
Sure.
Io ricordo la prima volta la mia nonna è andata agli Stati Uniti una venerdì sera per lo Shabbat e poi ha preso in braccio le due candele, portacandele, per andare giù nella cantina, per accendere le candele dello Shabbat. Mio padre ha detto: mamma, questa America, la terra, paese di libertà. Lei ha detto: non sono sicura. And so she continued in America to light candles in, we call it the basement, the cellar, in the cantina, all of her life, because many traditions, many things that we Marranos did to hold on to our roots, they became practices. And it was very difficult for especially Calabrese, very, very difficult to know which things the family did are superstition, which things are tradition, which things are cultural, and which are religious.
Well, I think that shows us a good aspect of the film that Rabbi is talking about, understanding the different practices that people had that they didn't even know were related to their religious cultural history.
That's
now, Rabbi, in your case, you knew your family. You knew you were Jewish, so even though the lighting of candles was kind of still hidden, it was a Jewish tradition. But what about people, let's say in Calabria, in your ancestral home, who would do things they didn't know that they were kind of keeping up with the Jewish tradition? So how would you find out what they did, or that they might even be Jewish?
A very good question, because it was really trial and error. And because my father brought my grandmother to the United States, we all had the opportunity to grow up Jewish, because there was an active Jewish community, whereas in Calabria there was no active or public presence or organized Jewish experience for over 500 years. So I went back home to Serrastretta, the little town where my father and my ancestors were from, a town founded by 5 Jewish families who were running from persecution. And I knew from the stories my father told and from what I had understood about the history of the town, that back 400 and 500 years ago, everybody who settled there was Jewish, everybody. So I would go around town and I would say, "Do you think you're Jewish?" And people would say, "No, I don't think so." And then I realized I was asking the wrong question. What I needed to do was I needed to say, "Do you have any family traditions that seem unusual in terms of what other Southern Italians are doing?" And then I even became more specific. And I said, "How about when a baby is born?" "Oh yes, when a baby is born, we put a red string in the crib," which of course goes back to the Kabbalah. "And what about when children reach 12 and 13? Well, when a girl reaches 12, we have a special meal, a special welcoming meal, and we make special blessings for her." And what about marriage? Well, when we marry, we present the bride and groom with a crocheted bedspread that will go onto the matrimoniale, onto the marriage bed. But before it goes into the house, 4 men hold the 4 corners, and we put the bride and groom underneath sotto la coperta, under the covering, which of course is reminiscent of the chuppah. And then there were all kinds of kitchen traditions. I began saying, "What do you do in the kitchen? How do you prepare food? What do you eat? Do you separate anything?" "Oh, yes, indeed. We never have cheese. We never have formaggio con carne. Never cheese with meat because of famale. It will be bad for the stomach." And that's how I began to uncover all of these Jewish traditions. And of course, by being in the town that was part of my heritage, I was accepted as well. So putting those two things together gave me a wealth of information that we see in the film.
So when you would meet a family in your neighborhood and you'd hear these stories from them, and these were people who, by their own accounts, were good Catholics probably. I mean, they probably went to church.
Well,
what did they say?
No,
How did they react when you said, Rabbi, here you are, this American Italian, and you're telling them you're Jewish? How did they react? Some people might say, please, go away. I don't need this.
That's right. That's right. You're absolutely right. And some people did say, "Oh mio Dio, this can't be true." But I noticed that in our town, many people said, "Siamo laici, we're secular," and that was because many people never felt comfortable in the church. Now, some people did. And there would be, of course, an influx of participation at Christmas and Easter. But many people, when they got married in the Catholic Mass, did this little ceremony before the bride and groom walked into their home, into the home that they would share together as husband and wife, which is very much the tradition of the chuppah. The chuppah represents the roof of the home that you will share. It's symbolic of the home that you will actually have. And so there were many times I would say to people that, these traditions are very interesting, that they go back centuries. There's a possibility that your family was Jewish. And for the most part, people would say, we always thought that. We always thought that. And of course, using the right word was became an important part of my discussions and questions as well, because Ebraici, Jews, Palestinesi, because back years ago the area was called Palestine, Ibrei, there were just all different kinds, Judaica. All different kinds of words in both Italian and dialect, which were also had a little touch of Hebrew too. So it was for me, it was very much being a detective. But I will say this: there were a couple of deathbed announcements. A young woman, yes, confessions. That's the word I'm looking for. A woman came to me and she said, Our grandmother just passed away, and before she died, she gathered all of us, and she said, please do not call the priest, when I'm dead, do not put a rosary in my hand, no pictures of saints with my prayer for the Catholic prayer for the dead for me on the back, and wrap my body in a sheet, bury me by sundown of the next day. I never told you we're Jewish. And she literally took her last breath. And the mother and the daughter came to me and said, what do we do? What do we do? And so that's how how I've been able to open the door to Jewish traditions to the people, not only in my town, but in many of these mountain communities where Jews fled during times of persecution.
Rabbi, I want to ask you something, Carl, if you'll just indulge me for a minute. Sure. What I found interesting was that when, in the movie, even when you go around and you ask, questions of the local townspeople, how even though it seemed like something that was kind of, undercover that you're not supposed to talk about, but when you started, taking the layers off and asking questions, they all were actually rather forthcoming with sharing their thoughts or what they remember from the stories that they were told, because a lot of them obviously are a little bit older. So, how did you find, talking to people that, all of a sudden they were, ready to engage in this conversation based on the questions you asked?
Well, for a couple of things have been happening, and this speaks to what you said about it's sort of in now and kind of cool in a way to have Jewish roots, to have an unusual ethnic background, and I certainly capitalized upon that. And in the old Jewish quarter of Timpone, which we also see in the film, I met with lots of the little ladies, especially who lived there, and one of the first things that happened was we put up a plaque which designated the area as having been Jewish back to the 1100s, and that gave a certain sense of pride to the people living there, and also because I am not the stereotypical elderly male Italian rabbi, and the ones that maybe they have seen on TV who seem remote. Now, certainly the Italian rabbis are not all remote, but sometimes they seem so on Italian television. But because I walk through the quarter as one of them, I talk to their children, I spend time with them, I get to know them, they are very, very forthcoming because they see a sense of pride in me. They see that glow about me of having found my Jewish roots, and it makes a personal connection. And they just start talking mostly about their surnames and about the names that they knew that were once Jewish.
You know, it's interesting. I grew up in Laurelton, Queens, New York, which is near Kennedy Airport, and we grew up in an area that, and the schools that I went to had Jewish kids, Irish kids, black kids from St. Albans, Springfield Gardens, and lots of Italian kids. And almost always, if there were cross-ethnic group contacts, friendships, the kids that you played with or whatever, it was usually the Jewish kids and the Italian kids. And I remember going into Italian homes and saying, oh, this is like a Jewish home, just they speak Italian. There was something, whether it was the food or the grandparents, who knows what. You know, in my neighborhood, if there was some intermarriage at the time, we're going back, 40, 50 years, almost inevitably it was a mixed Jewish-Italian couple. And even in my father's law practice, as a Jewish lawyer after World War II, when it was time to have non-Jewish partners in the practice, the partners were almost always Italian. So, Al Pacino gave an interview and he said that he grew up in less of an Italian neighborhood and more of a Jewish neighborhood in Brooklyn. And he said, but after all, what's a Sicilian but an Italian Jew? Meaning even Al Pacino understood that there was some chemistry,
Yes.
maybe inexplicable, between Jews and Italians. So my question to you, Rabbi, is this is not just by chance.
That's right, and that's what I have found since I have been in Italy working on the whole Anisim issue here for the last 12 years. It is not by chance, and it is not by coincidence. Our cultural center, our Italian Jewish Cultural Center of Calabria, has done a lot of work in discerning about the Italian, about this phenomenon, and especially Italian Americans and Italian Canadians. And this is what we found. We found that among intermarriage in America and in Canada, of all the possible combinations of a Jewish person and another person, far and away the majority of interfaith of marriages and families are Jewish and Italian. And because we know that prior to the Inquisition, about 50% of the population of Sicily and Calabria and the Aeolian Islands was Jewish. 50%. When you stack that up against the fact that that the immigration to the United States and Canada came from the poorest parts of Italy, the islands, Sicily, and Calabria, that 81% of Italian Americans and Italian Canadians come from the South. The chances of an Italian American, like the way you grew up, Carl, with and the way and the people in your father's practice, the Italians in your father's practice, the chances are very great, even arithmetically, mathematically, that these people that you grew up with, that Randi grew up with, that our listeners have grown up with, originally were Jewish and had Jewish roots.
Yeah, very much so. You know, I'm going to reveal something. Now, I'm not an Italian Jew, Rabbi, but, and I think did your family speak Spanish, Ladino?
My parents spoke Ladino to each other when they didn't want the kids to know what they were talking about. So my vocabulary consisted of sex and money.
So my mother's side of the family came to America about 100 years ago from Salonika in Greece, and they were Sephardic Jews who had the tradition, not secret Jews, fully Jewish tradition going back to the Inquisition. And my grandfather came to America as a young man in about 1910, and by 1913 at Ellis Island, and I went onto the Ellis Island website, I found my great-grandfather, my great-grandmother, my great-uncle, and my grandfather's future wife all arrived in August of 1914 on a ship from I guess it was from Perez. So now, here's the connection to the Italian side. So I always thought of them as having gone directly from Spain to what was then the Ottoman Empire to Salonika.
Right.
And then I was reading, and lo and behold, their family name was Capon. We call it Capon in America, and in Hebrew we would say, or in Italian we'd say Capone, C-A-P-O-N. And lo and behold, I read about Laura Capone, whose father was a high admiral in the Italian Navy in World War I, and Laura Capone married Enrico Fermi. They were northern Italian Jews, and eventually they went to America. So all of a sudden, and this is my question to you, all of a sudden I thought, well, maybe indeed my family kind of stopped off in Italy for a generation or two, who knows, and then went on to Salonika. But indeed, my mother, who was born in 1918, she should rest in peace, on the Lower East Side of New York, and she was largely raised at the beginning by her grandmother, who did not speak English and spoke Ladino, Jewish Spanish. My mother spoke Ladino before she spoke English. So, I mean, and this is straight back to, to the Inquisition and to the expulsion of the Jews. My youngest daughter very much wants to try to get Spanish citizenship. So tell me, do you think that I've got some an Italian Jewish connection with my name?
Of course you do, because Capone is a Calabrese name. We find it in the toe of the boot in the area of Reggio Calabria, and I would suggest that taking a look in Saloniki, there is a Calabrese synagogue there, and I don't believe that it is operating now. It is a bit of a museum, but there is a plaque on the side of the building listing all of the names of the original members. And I would suggest that you look there, because I would bet that the name Capone is there. And it is a Southern Italian name, and sometimes it's Capone with an E at the end as well, which is the plural. That's not unusual to have Capone with an I, Capone with an E, to signify...
So are we theorizing that Al Capone was a secret Jew?
Yes, absolutely. Well, we've got some in our background that we're not too proud of.
By the way, speaking of cultural affinity, indeed, if you look at the whole gamut of mafia films, of The Godfather, always in the ethnic overlay of the mafia, they always had a disdain for other groups, right? I mean. You had to be in the Sicilian family. But always in these movies and in the books, if they have a connection which is kind of equal or culturally equal or appreciative, it's always with the Jewish mobsters.
That's right.
They could be lawyers, they could be the money men, the Mayor Lansky's, but they got along. And maybe that's it.
Well, the two money men for Al Capone was a man by the name of, I believe it was Alfredo Aiello, and he was one of the consiglieri of Al Capone, and the other finance guy was a Jewish man. There's a lot of affinity between Italians and Jews, and it's not just
but it's very interesting.
It's very interesting. Well, as with all ethnic groups, you've got the good, bad, and the ugly.
All right. Well, I think that's for another episode, the Italian-Jewish mafia roots. Very, very interesting. But I'm going to ask you one final question here, Rabbi, to kind of tie this together as we close out this episode. So if we have viewers that are watching this with us, what kind of questions should they be going back to their older family members and asking if they think by watching this, you know what, my family might actually have Jewish roots? What are the kind of questions that we could say they could go back and ask their grandparents or their aunts and uncles to find out maybe there's some of these, lost traditions on their side of the family?
Well, first of all, I would suggest that the person find the oldest living relative and many times the keeper of the traditions would be a female. So I would find a great aunt, a great niece, the oldest living relative that you can find, and also if the family is amenable, gathering several people together, because one memory can spark another. And the questions I would ask would be, what did your family do for certain special occasions? When babies were born, when children turned 12 and 13, marriage, death and dying, and mourning. And those are two different things. What did you do when a person actually passed away, and how was the body treated? And what did you do in the cemetery? That, for example, a woman said to me recently, she said, in Italy, here in Italy, we're all buried above ground because of the volcanic rock. We can't dig in. But my uncle, when he died, was adamant that his grave be dug in the dirt, and of course that's another clue. And then then what is done at home? What happens at home after the funeral? Many times people walk in the door, and the first thing they put in their mouth is a piece of chopped egg. And again, that is a Jewish tradition. Sitting on low chairs. I noticed that mourning traditions in my town is covering the mirrors in white. And I'm able to point out to people that these are Jewish traditions. And then I would go into the kitchen. And that's where many traditions last. They last, and they endure over time, because we eat 3 or 4 meals a day. And so that is a way of keeping traditions alive, as opposed to things that happen just once a year. And so I would say, how you prepare food. Is there anything you eat particularly once a week? Any special meal on a Friday or a Saturday? The lighting of one candle on a white tablecloth. That comes up a lot. So those are some of the questions that I would encourage people to ask, and also to email me. I can send them a list as well, and start asking about them, and then we can help them make these really important connections, not only to discover, but if they choose, to embrace their Jewish roots.
Well,
if people want to see a little bit of the film without yet getting the whole DVD, I think, Randi, tell me if I'm right, but if they just do the Secret Jews of Calabria on YouTube, the trailer, the 14-minute trailer for the film will pop up, no?
Yes, actually, what they can do is just visit RabbiBarbara.com or go to SecretJews.com. And what you will see is a little icon for a YouTube channel in the upper right corner. And if you click on that, living on Rabbi's YouTube channel, you can watch the trailer, and there are certain other excerpts and other videos, just as this one will ultimately live there for people to view as well. So they can get a little feel for it and hopefully want to see the full version.
Fabulous. Rabbi, every time I have one of these conversations with you, I am inspired. I don't know what I'm inspired to do, but I am inspired.
Thank you. That's the little light in the neshama, the little light in the soul. And when we kind of feed that flame and nurture that spark, we never know what will happen next.
In our next conversation, I'm going to tell you something about the secret Jews of the Navajo Nation.
Well, there you go. There's your teaser, everyone. I would like to thank all of you for joining us, and hopefully you have been inspired to ask some questions about your family background. And I can tell you, if you keep joining us every week, if you talk to Rabbi Aiello long enough, even if you don't think that you're an Italian Jew, she's going to somehow bring you back there. So it's just this gift she has. But anyway, thank you for joining us on this episode of Secret Jews, Uncovering Hidden Traditions. I'm Dr. Randi Ross, and along with my co-host, Rabbi Barbara Aiello, and producer, Carl Perkal, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you back here for the next episode.